Hello there, everyone. Welcome to Coffee Time Career Chat. My name is Patricia Hayes, and if this is the first time that you are joining, so glad to have you here, where we talk about all things related to professional growth, career development, and relationship building. I am an executive advisor, career empowerment coach, and authentic networking strategist. All of those things mean I love using the executive level skills that I have developed over the years to help people be more empowered in their own careers, as well as developing their relationships for the long term, because your professional relationships are an untapped resource. And I like to make sure that we are tapping into them to the fullest of our ability, but doing so in an authentic manner and with purpose that's aligned with your long-term purpose. So, welcome. We are in the midst and continuing our transition series. It's been levels to this thing. If you want to go back and check on the YouTube channel, they are the ones that are the thriving through transitions in life and career. And we are at this point where we've just had the, messy middle, discussion where you're straight up in the middle of a storm when it comes to your professional career and in the midst of transition. And today we're talking about cleaning up after the transition storm, right? And the first thing I want to say is that this does not mean that the transition is complete, right? Maybe it's a little bit still messy, or it's towards the end of it. You're seeing a little more clarity about what's going on around you. So, for example, let's say there's been a huge turnover in your workspace. So let's say a boss is leaving, right? There is an executive level person who's leaving, which means all of that stuff flows downhill potentially. And there's a lot of shuffling, and there's a lot of, what's going to happen, or this is happening, and maybe there's some fast moving things that are going on. And in the midst of it, maybe you're being told you're going to be reassigned. Maybe you're going to be laid off. There are so many different levels to it, right? But here's the point. The storm is passing over, at least this part of it. And now it's time for you to take a look, because you can see a little more clearly. And it's time to prepare to clean up after the mess, right? Like, what is going on? You got to make sense of what's left. And it's kind of like treating it just like when you have a bad thunderstorm. And the first thing, you do is like, I need to go see what the damage is. And that's literally what you need to do. You need to do transition damage assessment after the bulk of this storm has passed. And maybe it's, storm one of two. So you got to do some damage assessment in between. And these are things we're going to talk about here pretty quickly today. So as you're looking at that transition damage assessment, what are the things that are going to be on that list? Well, the first thing is you got to gather what is salvageable, gather up, do the assessment. What are the things you're looking for? You're looking for relationships, right? Where there's some key relationships lost in the midst of this storm. It does happen. Where, let's say, perhaps someone has left someone else that you were a mentor or something, they were fired. Let's say there were some key people that you worked with on group projects that have moved around or moved. Or maybe there's just in the midst of the transition, you kind of found out who some people really were, because that happens as well. And it's like, okay, I need to know that I can no longer rely on that person. And I need to, figure out what to do next with that type of relationship. How is it going to move forward? So relationships are probably one of the biggest things that are impacted after a storm. And you need to figure out where you stand with folks. And that is not going to be an immediate thing, right? That is, there may be some that right away. And then there are others that you're going to learn more about as time progresses, right? And that's probably much more likely, but it is the thing to start recognizing. The second thing is literally your resources. What are some of the resources that maybe you had access to before that you no longer have access to? What are ones that you now realize, oh my gosh, I never had them to begin with? That's always a thing. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then other things like projects, favorite things you were working on. It just, I don't even say be creative. You will know, right? When you're looking to see what's salvageable, what can you save, what, just kind of what's left that you can gather up as you move forward and make decisions about what your next steps are going to be. These are the things. And so like I tossed out their projects and you're like, well, what do you mean by projects? Well, let's say that in the midst of all this churning and turnover, that there are some projects that got tossed to the side, ignored, not because they weren't necessarily important, but they just weren't a priority. So is it something that perhaps can be saved that if you're going to stay, that you can pick up and be responsible for, because that'll be good for your professional career and your growth, perhaps? Or if it's something that never took ground, never took off, is there some element of it that that you owned per se, and can take with you? You got to be careful about this, of course, when you're in a corporate environment or certain environments. But there are things, let's say if there was just an idea that you were thinking about and maybe it never went anywhere, it was never claimed, it was never done. And you're like, okay, let me keep this on my list. I don't know what's going to come of it, but let me keep this on my list as I move forward. Okay. So things like that, ideas, concepts that, again, you may not have ever even launched. Maybe they were just something you wrote on a piece of paper. These are the things to kind of gather up and figure out, is this salvageable? Is this something that perhaps I can work on later? And you don't have to make decisions about in what context and what form, just really taking note of like what is left around me and who. And, sometimes this is it's pretty intense, right? Especially if you're caught in a really messy transition storm. I've been there a couple of times. I'm thinking of one situation in particular, where once, a boss announced that they were retiring and leaving, then, everything just exploded and people started acting crazy and all kinds of weirdness happened, right? I mean, the stories I could tell. And in the midst of that, like, you've got to make sure that you are standing firm as you can, because it is a difficult thing, as well as keeping some level of awareness about you. We talked a little bit about this one of the previous sessions. So maintaining some level of awareness about you and being able to kind of like step back and look outside yourself. If there was one thing I would say that I wish I knew or learned sooner in that particular experience, it would have been that, right? It would have been that. So that, in your damage assessment, in your transition damage assessment, post-storm, gather up what's salvageable, which means asking, is this salvageable? It means asking the question and looking primarily at relationships, resources, ideas, concept, projects, things like that. The second piece is identify those tools and resources that were lost. So that's a little bit carrying over from the salvage piece, but also what's needed to rebuild. So what are those things you're recognizing now that you're going to need to move forward, right? Tools and resources. What am I talking about? Again, beyond people, right? Maybe there's some skill sets that you realize, I never really built those things out. I need to go get some professional development in that area. Maybe resources can just go the spectrum, right, of things that you may or may not have access to. Maybe they're HR related, maybe they're technical in nature, because there are things that in a shift, that automatically sometimes it's like, well, we're not going that direction anymore. So you lose access to maybe a whole, uh, uh, not just a professional skill set, but a technical resource, things like that. That happens all the time. So how can you rebuild? Is there another way that you can get access to it? If there's something like, well, I decided this is something I really want to be able to use going forward in my professional career. So is this going to be something that I need to start budgeting for so that I can have access to it outside of my work environment, right? These are the things we start talking about, because there are going to be levels of investment that are going to be required, not just perhaps, but for sure. The question is what, right? There are going to be levels of investment required. The question is what, and whether you're willing to make the investment, whether it's an investment of time, whether it's an investment of the resources you currently have, and absolutely a investment of money. Bottom line, time, resources, and money. Those are the biggies. It's always that. So if you're thinking about that, identify what those tools and resources are going to be needed in order for you to move forward. Again, whether you're staying within your current organization and maybe there's a shift, or if you're like, I'm out and you don't know what that looks like yet, but potentially these are things I'm going to need access to because I'm not going to have access to them once I leave. All right. Thirdly, you got to develop a plan. You don't have to have some perfect detail. First of all, there is no perfect plan, because in these transitions, things happen and change all the time. Like literally last week, out of the blue, one of the boards that I serve on, we learned that our beloved executive director had gotten an offer from another organization that she could not turn down. And so there we are in the midst of getting ready to plan all of these things for the board and the organization, learning that like we don't have a leader. We got to select an interim. We got to decide whether this project is moving forward, and making the decision that no, it's got to be delayed because it's something that needs to be done with the sitting executive director, whoever that's going to be. Making adjustments on the fly. I'm like, that is literally what happens in the midst of a transition, whether it's one that's initiated by you or one that's comes from the external because of what's going on around you in your business, in your professional workplace, whatever. So knowing that, you got to create a plan. And there we were, just on the fly as executive team, putting together a quick plan of where things are going to be, while knowing that week to week, some of this is going to shift. But you have to acknowledge some things, right? Like, what are your goals now? Your goals, have they shifted? If they've shifted, how? And what are the new levels to that right now? So you don't necessarily even have to start from scratch, right? If you've done any of the work that we've talked about leading up to now, which is doing that reflection work, engaging and identifying what your long-term and short-term goals are, regardless of where you're going to be, if you take those things and then say, okay, now knowing what I know, what are the first 3 things I know that I need to do right now moving forward? Okay. That's your plan. It's like, it could be as simple as, it may not even be 3 things. It could be 2. It could be 1. It could be 1, which is, I need to get out. Like, the plan is, I need to get out. I need to leave. And if that's the plan, cool. But make one, identify it, make it real to yourself, because way too often people stick their heads in the sand. They dodge it and they just skip around, and then it just gets worse and worse. That is not what I want for you. That is not a good place to be, and it makes it much more difficult as you move down through the process. All right. So go ahead, stand up, own what's going on, recognize it for what it is. Say, here's my plan today. And know that you're going to have to come back to it and revisit it often. Okay. And once you have that plan, what's the last thing you got to do? Please take some action. You got to do the work. It doesn't matter. You can have the best plan in the world, but if you do not take action on it, it means nothing. It's worthless. And did I say make sure you write that plan down? Don't keep it in your head. That's a dangerous place to be in the middle of a transition because things could shift, like I said, from day to day, week to week. So write it down so that you can actually see what it was you thought, and then you can actively make changes or update it. Okay? So, but once you get that plan and once you make that decision, it's time to get to work. All of those things that you just did should go into the plan. Well, the damage assessment you did where you were looking to see what's salvageable, what are the tools and resources you've lost and that you now need to rebuild, or if there's something new, you've got this plan and now you need to move forward and you need to take action. So if there are relationships that you no longer have or have access to that you need to either rebuild or create anew, that goes in the plan. If there are resources like we talked about, that goes into the plan, right? Projects, ideas, thoughts you've had about what you might want to do or could do, that goes in your plan. Okay? And take action. Do something every day towards the plan, right? And we are going to get into that much more in the coming weeks where we start talking a little bit more specifically about, okay, now we're kind of past this piece. What are we doing now? Okay. So when you're looking to rebuild, what is it? So I'm going to make sure that I tell you a little bit because I want you to be ready for it. Let's see. I love my little, y'all, I keep notes on all the things. And so here we go. So when you have done that work and you post, it's now time to rebuild and move forward, things to look forward to. Revisiting your original plan. How are you moving? Are you moving about with authenticity and purpose? Whether you're reinventing yourself, not remaking, you don't have to start from scratch, and how the journey moves forward for you. Okay. That's what you have to look forward to. And we're going to be talking about each one of those things in the coming weeks and tie it all off with a bow just in time for the holidays. And I am soliciting from you any ideas or needs that you think you might have moving forward to close out this year and to move forward into next year, because that planning has begun. And one of those things is if you recognize that you need support in your professional development, in your growth for your career, because this is not about finding the next job. This is about growing your career. Then hit me up in the DMs on social, send me an email, tell me a little bit about what the issue or the concern is, and let's figure out if there's a way that we can work together to help you do that, right? Whether it's one-on-one, short-term, just you need a few thoughts to help you start getting going, or whether you need a VIP day or long-term one-on-one coaching, all right? Those are the things that we're going to share. I look forward to talking with you some more in the coming weeks. Take care and have a fantastic day.